Hello, good evening. Welcome to Out of Many, a series of conversations between National Academicians participating in our digital annual exhibition, E Pluribus Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan. I'm Adrienne Elise Tarver, the Director of Programs here at the National Academy of Design. If you haven't yet explored the show, please do so when you're able. We're dropping the link to the exhibition in the chat. This exhibition contends with the challenge of creating a virtual exhibition, not just during a waning pandemic, not just amongst social upheaval and political turmoil, but also amongst a group of artists and architects who are as different as they are interesting. E Pluribus features over 100 academicians and asks the questions, what new futures can be created if Americans stop pursuing the ideal of national unity and accept our reality as an incongruent collective? Tonight, we're joined by Leslie Wayne and E Pluribus curator, Dr. Kelli Morgan, in conversation. Please join us after the conversation for a live Q&A with Leslie and Kelli. For those of you who can see the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, you can use that to drop any questions during the conversation, and at the end, we'll be able to answer them. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelli Morgan. Dr. Morgan is the newly appointed inaugural Director of Curatorial Studies and Professor of the Practice and History of Art and Architecture at Tufts University in Boston. She is a curator, educator, and social justice activist who specializes in American art and visual culture, and her scholarly commitment to the investigation of anti-Blackness within those fields has demonstrated how traditional art history and museum practice work specifically to uphold white supremacy. Dr. Morgan has held curatorial positions at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, the Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. She has held teaching positions at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, Wayne State University, and the University of Michigan, where she merged the classroom and the museum gallery to create various anti-racist paradigms for how curators can actively address the complexities of traditional art history, community engagement, and scholarly innovation. In 2014, Morgan was awarded a dissertation fellowship from the Ford Foundation and earned her PhD in Afro-American Studies and a graduate certificate in Public History Museum Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2017. Hi, Kelli. How are you? Uh-oh, you're muted.
I swear to God, I've done that like every time.
Every time. It's not Zoom without it.
Oh, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Super good. I'm super excited about tonight. I've been super excited about all of them actually. But really, I like this one, and the conversation with Don has like such a special place in my heart because Leslie Wayne and Don Porcaro are two people that I kind of call my art parents. So people that have like shepherded me through my career, who met me like right out of graduate school and have been, just those refuges when I needed them, those safe spaces, when I also needed them. And running into the kinds of friction that I've run into in my career. And Leslie and Don have always been that for me. So for those of you who don't know Leslie, she grew up in Los Angeles, attended the University of California at Santa Barbara, and later transferred to Parsons School of Design, where she earned her BFA in sculpture in 1984. She has exhibited widely throughout the United States and abroad and have received grants from the New York Foundation for the Arts, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Bull Foundation, Adolph and Esther Gottlieb Foundation, and Pollock Krasner Foundation. Her works are in numerous public collections, including the Birmingham Museum of Art, the Davis Parish Museum of Art, the Portland Museum of Art, the Miami Museum of Contemporary Art, Smithsonian Museum, Cooper Hewitt, Yale, Beinecke Library, Neuberger Museum of Art, in the Foundation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain, la Collection Jamu, and la Colonzi Miramati, sorry, Leslie, among others. She is represented by Jack Shaman Gallery. Please join me in welcoming artist Leslie Wayne.
There we go.
How are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you, Kelli?
I'm good. I'm like, forgive my Italian and horrible French pronunciation.
That's okay. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you too. I'm so excited to do this because like I was saying to Sangram when we spoke, right? Like your work was another work, in the submissions that grabbed me right away on like a personal level. As much as the work is about, as much as the show, is about unity or the lack thereof, that we've had or wrestled with in this country for so many years. I think we were, in the midst of, interestingly, right, like a unification of three pretty significant, social shifts, that really pushed me, into myself. And so when I saw the work, I was like, oh my God, this is like, again, like me, like kind of where I'm at right now. The other thing is like, I've been talking a lot about, my grandparents and how they figure so prominently in my work lately. And that in the stars and the universe and telescopes and astronomy was something else that I did with my granddad. So I was like, these kind of, it's these interesting ways, like I was telling Sangram that, artists really make the untangible tangible, and I really felt that, from this work as well. So can you kind of walk us through, how you came to both making the work, in a conceptual way, but then also how you came to thinking through it as a good submission for this show?
That painting I made at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think it was actually not that long after the murder of George Floyd. And I just found myself, I think like everybody at that time, really introspecting, if that's a verb, and feeling kind of like I had to take a break in the studio. Like it just really threw me. And so I found myself literally gazing out the window a lot. And as we all gaze out the window or wherever we find ourselves internally, thinking about ourselves and our lives and our purpose and, our agency and what are we doing and who are we? And we look at the stars, where we came from. And so I wanted to give a visualization to that feeling. And so I had already started painting windows before, but this kind of gave me the format to really, or the conceptual format, to do a painting about this particular moment.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I touched you because that's really what I wanted you to feel. You could imagine, looking out the window and just letting your mind wander.
Yeah. And I think, for me too, it was like this, like I was in Indianapolis, right after George Floyd. So like literally sitting in my living room, looking out the window, like watching the protesters,
right.
Protest peacefully and like watching the police respond very violently, to that. So it made me also think about these ways, and this is like the super science nerd of me, like Big Bang and like, the ways in which, I guess like celestial happenings, right? Or, cosmic happenings, like the physics of it all. So the way we kind of crash into each other, or I should say molecules, right? Like crash into each other to produce new stars or new galaxies or whatever. And like the title of it, like the universe being on the inside, it's like, what does that mean in a moment where we're literally like crashing into each other? Yeah. What new things can we make out of that?
Yeah. And when you look at the painting, if you pay attention, you see that the curtain, you're actually on the outside looking in because the curtain's on the inside. And yet when you're looking in, what you're really looking at is the universe. So that was the metaphor.
Do we have an image? Do we have slides?
Oh, no. Okay. Well, that's a different painting altogether.
Yeah, it's like we'll skip through.
Well, there's a painting at the end of this. That's not the painting that's in the show, but definitely from the series. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's beautiful too.
So this is number 3. I did 3 on that theme. And this one I was having a little fun with the perspective of the shutters.
Yeah.
They look like they're coming out at you, but in fact, the painting is completely flat. I mean, it's dimensional in other ways, but it's just a trick of perspective.
Yeah, so so I guess since we have your slides up, we can go from the beginning. So when we met, you were making your paint rags,
Right.
and that was something that I was like so fascinated by. Because as, again, like, young grad student, thinking, like, having learned about sculpture in such a, marble wood, kind of way. And I was like, and I remember the day we were sitting and you were like, oh no, it's all paint. And I was like, get out of here. Talk me through, your progression from these works in like the late 2000s, to your window works now, or the work you're doing now.
Yeah. So this painting, I think, is pretty emblematic of what most people would identify with me for doing small, this size, very dimensional, luscious, colorful abstraction. And interestingly, this whole series was begun as a kind of an exercise because at the time I was working on a really large 11-foot long painting that was going to go into a traveling show. And it was just driving me mad. And I wanted to have something that would keep me kind of my hands occupied on something a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just read a fascinating article in the New Yorker about intuition, the nature of insight, actually. It was called Eureka Hunt by Jonah Lehrer, I think, yeah. And it opened with a description of these firefighters in California who were running up the hill to get ahead of a line of fire to keep it back. And the captain was bringing up the rear and his men were all in front of him. And it is at a certain point, he realized that he wasn't going to be able to outrun the fire. And so in a flash of inspiration, he crouched down, doused himself with water, put something, over his nose, and thought, well, I'm just going to let this line jump me and hope that I survive. And in the end, he was the only one who did survive. None of us.
Oh my gosh.
And I just thought, wow, that's really fascinating because he obviously had a wealth of information and experience, but he didn't have time to think about it. It was just he had this eureka moment. He knew exactly what to do. It just came to him. And while we certainly are not taking our lives in our hands most of the time when we're in the studio, we are all looking for those eureka moments where we can stop thinking and allow that magic to take over. And there's a term that painters often use that I always used to think was kind of corny, but there's an element of truth to that, which is the painting painted itself. But that's really because you're in the zone and it just happens. And so I wanted to create a kind of environment that would allow me to have those moments more often than not.
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which, a lot of artists do that, kind of get into the zone, is to listen to music. So that's where the title of the series, One Big Love, comes from, because it's the Patty Griffin song that I was obsessed with at the time. I was listening to it all the time. So I did these paintings for about 5 years. This is number 2. I got up to number 80 and decided I've had enough. And that's when I started doing the paint rags. Go to the next slide. There we go. So I kind of felt like, I want to do something else with all this materiality. And one of the paintings in the One Big Love series was a shape, because all those paintings were kind of organically shaped. And one of them was this kind of like a half a donut that I draped the paint over.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like the paint was literally draped on a nail hanging on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started thinking about it and working through that, the paint started becoming more and more like looking like fabric.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of went in that direction. I was thinking about how beautiful my paint rags in my studio are. You know, they're all stained with, you know, the color that I wipe off my brushes. And so that's how they came about in terms of process. Thinking about them more conceptually, I was thinking actually about Duchamp and how funny it would be to make a painting or a work of art that looks like a ready-made, but in fact is very meticulously made by hand. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So they went, you know, I did these also. I worked on these for about 5 years, and I started getting very interested in different textile patterns from cultures all around the world, and how interesting it was and wonderful it was that so many of the patterns that I saw from completely different cultures actually were very similar, and that design and pattern is a wonderful unifier. This particular one is the patterns, the black and white you see is Adinkra, which is a tribe in Ghana, and they do these patterns by cutting out the calabash to make stamps. They make stamps out of the calabash.
Mm-hmm.
And the colored part, the strips part, that looks to me, if I remember correctly, that looks like kente cloth, which is a kind of mende strip weave, which is made on a vertical loom, usually on the west coast, the Gold Coast of Africa. So I really enjoyed, I did a whole series of rags that were based on different patterns. You know, Japanese textile patterns, a lot of African patterns, some Native American patterns. And then I got tired of doing them too. And I think I felt like they had reached their limit in terms of being able to push the idea forward. And I wanted to do something else with this kind of cloth-like aspect of the work. And I had just reread, if I remember at the time, a 1979 essay by Rosalind Krauss called Sculpture in the Expanded Field. You ever read that?
Wow.
She was making a case about term sculpture that, sorry for the ambient noise here, we got a lot of,
I had muted myself.
11th Avenue.
Really loud.
She made a case for the term sculpture, that it had become so malleable that it was starting to incorporate video and performance and sound and installation, that all of a sudden sculpture meant all of those things. And yet we still think of the term in relationship to its historical precedent, which is a three-dimensional discrete object in a room. And I thought, well, painting's not that different, you know, in spite of the myriad ways that artists approach painting. We still think of painting kind of in terms of the Renaissance idea of the window, the picture of something. And I just wanted to be free of that. And not that, you know, it's not that you have to reinvent the wheel, but you kind of have to make people feel like they've never seen the wheel before. Make them a new wheel. And so I started this series called Free Experience. That was a show that I had at the gallery, Jack Schumann Gallery, in 2017. And this is a painting from that show. I was thinking a lot about kind of this idea of abundance of material being overloaded. I was looking at a lot of those images that you see on, unless you've traveled there and seen it in person, you see them on the internet of usually guys, more often than not, on little bicycles carrying these gigantic loads of cargo. And I wanted that feeling. And so I had all of my panels cut so that they were wider at the top to emphasize that feeling of, abundance. And in this painting, I wanted to see how many different ways I could express or articulate the idea of wood, from just straight ahead representational painting to actually making forms out of paint that look like wood. And so that's what this painting was about. Yeah. And those, I probably worked on that series for several years as well. And it also, I would say that this body of work brought me back to my roots as a representational painter. I mean, I was a plein air landscape painter until I moved to Florida. And I always thought that one day that would come back into my work, but I didn't know quite how I was going to introduce it in a way that would make sense, given the very particular weird way I work with the material. And this really paved the way for me. So the next painting, yeah, I thought, well, how about if I take all of this material and just put it in the closet? And so I made a painting of this closet, and you can see very much like the first image that we spoke about, the shutters on the window. I was having a good time with the illusion of them coming into space. And at the bottom, I decided to just cut it flat, because I always want to kind of bring you back to the reality that, you know, this is a seduction. It's suspension of disbelief. But the truth is, we're just looking at a painting, a flat painting on a wall.
Yeah.
So this painting was also transformative for me because it got me thinking about interiors, interiority, the idea of a closet not just being a repository for heirlooms and keepsakes, but also kind of a secret place. And that, you can show the next slide. Nope, out of order. Next one, maybe. There we go. Yeah, this painting, was kind of I think the next one I did after heirloom.
Okay.
I really started to think about, take that perspective idea as well and exaggerate it so you really feel like, you know, if you think about the closet as being a safe place, a secret place that you might hide in, that you're a little person as a child and you're always looking up at things that look enormous to you.
Yeah.
So that kind of almost German expressionist, slightly scary perspective, I was really channeling those ideas when I made this painting. And it's hard to see, you know, there's not a detail of this here, but all that colorful stuff there inside the closet was my kind of representation of the paint mounds that I've collected over the years, which are really what a lot of painters do in the studio. When they finish cleaning their palette, they dump the paint. And then they kind of grow. And I've made many over the years. And so I was kind of giving voice to that paint mound in there. And that was in my last show, What's Inside. That was at Jack Shaman a couple of years ago. And that led me, you can go back to the previous slide because that's a newer one. Yeah, there we go. So the next couple of images are paintings that I had in my recent show in May. The universe is on the inside. Again, I'm thinking about the inside and what that means to have that kind of interior, that sense of interiority. And in this case, you know, during the pandemic, of course, we were all locked down. We were all inside. And, you know, the silver lining for a lot of artists about the pandemic was that we were relieved of all the social obligations of being in the art world. And in New York, they're really intense. I mean, I can't tell you how many weeks there would be 3 or 4 nights a week where we would be going to several openings a night and dinner afterwards. And it's all stuff, you know, we enjoy and we want to do, but it's exhausting.
Yeah, it is. I can't lie. Like,
It's
it was helpful even as a curator. Yeah. Yeah.
distracting, and it was just kind of a relief. Um, so in one way, I felt like, oh, great, you know, just go to work, get up in the morning, go to work, come home. And this image is a picture of one of my the windows in my studio. And I wanted to give that feeling of, you know, being on the inside and looking out, but not really being able to see what's outside. So you're kind of, you're on the one hand, you're protected, but on the other hand, you're kept at bay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like a perfect reading, right? Of just how that moment resonated with so many, with so many of us, right? Because like in my kind of circle of folks, it was the same kind of thing. You know, it was like, as even as curators, like, you know, we have a similar schedule. You know, chief curators, directors is even worse. You know, where it's every night.
Yeah, you're always on.
And but the thought that like, oh, it'll be like 2 weeks, you know, and then we'll just be right back. You know, it'll be a good sort of respite, and then it wasn't. You know, and then society right? Society erupted too.
Right.
So it was a way that, like you said, just you're inside, you can, I'm trying to figure out how to say this correctly. It's like we could see what was happening, but I think it was even more, the moment made the why more visible, right? We couldn't really run from the why.
Right.
Because we were like stuck at home.
That's right. I mean, the confluence of pandemic and the George Floyd murder, it was just devastating.
Yeah. And it like forced us to look, you know, kind of going back to the painting that's in the show, right? Like it forced us to look at ourselves and say, oh shit, you know, you know, like I thought we were past this, like the way that we like to concretize history, be it racial history, you know, gender history, class history, to, you know, the post-World War I moment, right? Or the civil rights movement, or even the Civil War, just whatever. It's like, you know, we sort of lock it, you know, into these things that happen.
These categories that we have nothing to do with. Yeah, that was right.
Yep.
We're in it.
Yeah, and we're in it, and it's in us. You know, so like I said, the not just the title of the work, right, but just the way that you're working through that concept. And artists, you know, other artists in the show too, you know, that are really saying, you know, these systems that we all complain about, we pretty much all contribute to them.
We're complicit whether we realize it or not.
Right.
Yeah, it's so part of our education, our society, the norms that we have, you know, have been drummed into us. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, and like seeing that consequence, you know, play out, you know, in front of us, you know, kind of like month, you know, every couple of weeks, you know, every like 6 to 8 weeks, you know, there was something else I would say to my mom. Like, is this what it was like to be alive in the 60s? Because as a historian, I'm very like, I'm a nut about the 60s. Because so much, you know, sort of climactic, traumatic stuff, you know, was happening.
Yeah, but in the 60s and the 70s, it was peace, love, and rock and roll. And now it's a lot more toxic stuff going on.
Yeah, you know, and I was like, this must be what it was like. Because I think my generation, you know, I don't think we've ever had to pause. Maybe September 11th.
Right.
You know, but then even that, you know, we have this amnesia, you know, where it just kind of says, okay, we're done with that. You know,
if you weren't living in New York City, you were, again, it was kind of something that happened somewhere else.
Yeah, totally. You know, and like I said, having to just really deal with the realities, you know, of the ways in which our lives every day, you know, kind of quotidian, you know, I'm going to Starbucks to get my latte,
Yeah.
really does have, negative ramifications, in terms of like capitalism, or like things like having, like I said, just kind of regular everyday Americans, like having to deal with those realities.
Right. Yeah. So, well, you can go to the next image. There we go. Yeah, so this was in the show also. I was basically, most of the show, with the exception of a few of those windows, contained images, paintings of things that were in my studio. I had a couple of paintings of my work tables and things of that nature. So these are two mirrors that actually are in my studio. They're old antique mirrors, and I just decided to take a selfie and then reproduce. I wasn't so interested in doing a self-portrait. I was interested in doing a painting about self-reflection.
Okay.
So that's why I reproduced the frame as part of the painting. And then when I did the top one, I just noticed, I was sitting at my desk and I noticed that the reflection of my legs was, I could see in the mirror that was sitting on the floor across from me.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, that's perfect, because it's a perfect metaphor for the moment that we're in as well, because we're so fractured and we're divided. And yeah, so that was the inspiration to do those two paintings and to really install them together like that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and not even just the fracture in terms of like your body being cut off in the actual picture plane, but just the space in between both, in between both spaces. So then there's like evolution is not the word, but like, because I can't think of another word right now. But like when we're in process,
yeah,
in between, whether that's jobs, or just literal growth, so you think about that 12 to 15, or gosh, just anything, happening. And I don't think we look enough, at those liminal transitional spaces, those spaces where there's a silence, there's an absence, there's something you can't necessarily understand. I feel like I'm still in a space with myself like that right now.
But not able to quite process it yet, because we're looking back, thinking about what we did in the past, or we're looking ahead, our aspirations, or we're trying to be in the moment. But that other space, it's kind of, as you say, liminal. That's none of those.
Right.
So we haven't quite processed yet what it is.
And we're so uncomfortable in those spaces. And I think we're in those spaces more times than we're not, Leslie. Like, but it's so discomforting, for us. It's something we don't talk about. So you talk about like when you finish the book, when you finish the painting, when you finish the, like when you get the award. And rarely, I think maybe a little more so nowadays, but like, rarely do we talk about like I always tell people like, oh, if you saw what it looks like when I'm not online giving a lecture, right? Or when I'm not in front of a classroom, ooh wee. Like, but that is the moments, where it's like 3:00 in the morning and I'm smoking a cigarette and I have that moment,
having that eureka moment.
Yes, that. So I like going back to, I wrote that down too, like going back to that, like the way that in my experience, I think these liminal spaces, are the moments where if you're quiet enough, you do, get the direction, right? You do get like you learn what the next, or you can hear, right, what the next, or maybe even feel what the next steps are. And I think that's something that artists hone, right, in a way that most people don't.
You need to trust that what you're doing maybe not, maybe won't be successful, but will take you somewhere that is positive, whether it's a failure that you learn from or it's a success.
That part.
But you trust the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
That part. That part. You know, and I think again, like I said, that's why the work really like spoke to me, because that whole moment in my life was like, I'm trying not to do what some other force is telling me I absolutely have to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and bargaining. You know, it's like, well, I'll do it like this if I get this thing first. And yeah, just jumping, you know, or just trusting it. And it wound up being like the best decision I'd ever made. I mean, it was still traumatic, but it was like the best decision, yeah, that I'd ever made. I was like, oh my gosh. So this show came along, I think too, you know, maybe like 3 months after, you know, that moment, you know, where I was like, what happens when if we as a country like take that, like here we got this pause, not for the best reason, you know, but nonetheless, we got this pause. What happens when we're quiet and we listen? What can we produce? How can we make this a little bit, you know, better than it's always been? You know, or that way that we'll just go like, oh, that's just like you said, that's something that's happening over there.
Right.
And so I wanted, and again, it was like this moment as a curator where I was like, yeah, that's kind of a skill, you know, that artists have in a way that most of us completely do not. You know, so I was like,
No, it was a perfect platform.
Right?
You created a perfect platform for this exhibition. And to think about these things, because sometimes we make works that we don't really understand until much later. And I think, yeah, well, of course, when I made the painting, I was thinking about these issues. I didn't know there would be this show.
Yeah.
I didn't thinking for the show, but yeah, it was good timing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so when you're talking about these liminal spaces where you have to trust yourself, this leads into the next image, which is no, that we talked about. One more. Yeah, okay. So that's what's in my studio right now. And when my show came down in June or early July, I decided to pursue a fantasy I've had for years, looking at my paint mounds. You know, I keep looking at them and they're so delicious looking. And I kept thinking, this would be amazing if it were 20 feet high, you know, maybe I could have it scanned and then 3D printed. Yeah. So, but barring all that, which I didn't have the facilities to do, I thought, well, let me just make this big damn sculpture already and get it over with. Because I knew that this pandemic is not over. And even though everything's opened up, we're still in this weird space.
Yeah.
And I just felt like this was a moment to continue following my bliss. And I wanted to do this. And the whole process of making this sculpture was also kind of being in that, I mean, most of the time I kind of didn't know, I had an idea and that idea changed. I thought, okay, I'm going to make the big mound, and it ended up not looking like my paint mound at all, but what could it be? And it went through so many different transformations. And finally, I ended up with this idea based on this song, Big Rock Candy Mountain. You know that song? I almost sent the link to the video, but if I thought if you play the video, you'll have to all watch the advertisement first, and it was just too obnoxious.
Okay.
It was on YouTube. But it's the song was written in, I think, 1929 about a hobo's dream.
Get out.
Of a perfect world.
I
don't remember. I don't have the lyrics in my head right now, but da 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 da. Big Candy Mountain. And you see this hobo, the animation, the original animation of it is wonderful.
Okay.
And so he's going through, imagining what a perfect world is like. And Big Rock Candy Mountain is literally a mountain of candy. And the sun is shining every day, and and everybody's happy. And the police have wooden legs, because hobos are always being chased by police. So
yes.
chased by the police, and there's liquor everywhere, and free tobacco, and it's hilarious. And I just thought this thing that I've built looks like Big Rock Candy Mountain, and it's in a way, it's like a chromatic Tower of Babel. It sort of harnesses the power of color to unify and to give joy. It's what I call, my Curator. It's an aspirational fantasy for something that just gives sheer pleasure and joy. And which is something that we all need, and we especially need it now. And when I finally finished it, it also occurred to me that it really tied into a whole body of work, some large works on paper, which I made around 2006, 2007, and they'd never seen the light of day, and I hauled them out.
Really? I was gonna ask, did they come after?
No,
Oh my God.
They're much older. And at the time, again, they started out as a kind of a response to my looking at my paint mounds. It was during kind of in between shows. I didn't quite know where I was going to go next. And so I thought, well, why don't I just fool around with this, for a little while. I ended up doing these, they grew, and I started small, and then I did these huge ones. And I was also volunteering for a couple of years around that time for an ocean conservation group. And so I was thinking a lot about the environment, and about our ocean, and about how we're polluting, and our culture of wastefulness. Also, it was around the time of Fukushima, and that terrible toxic thing that happened there. So they kind of took on another life. They left the idea of the paint now and became sort of metaphors for these piles of garbage, really toxic waste. And so I just thought, it was kind of a mirror of this candy mountain, the yin and the yang. And so everything's all installed in my studio now, and I think they have a really interesting conversation.
They do. I gotta come see them the next time I'm down. Because that's what I was thinking. I was just like, it's fascinating the way that you come back. So even when you were talking about, Big Rock Candy Mountain and what it meant, and I responded like that, because that's how my family wound up in Detroit. Because my grandfather used to hold them. As like a preteen. But this is like the mid 1920s.
Yeah, well, the song was
late 1920s.
Yeah, the song was written in 1929.
Yeah, so Granddad was born 1912. So and he was probably 13, like 12, 13, and he did it, up until like his 20s.
Wow.
And then he sold candy. This is like, I'm gonna do a whole journal entry after we get off the call, right? About just how I think he's been so central, to why I do this work, and like how I came into this work. But when he injured his finger in a stamping accident, he started shining shoes, and he would sell candy, to his clients. And I really think that as many of his clients, he worked at a racetrack, so I think they own horses, obviously. I think many of them, my mom's theory is like, some of them had to be art collectors too, because this is the way that he would engage me, with like Smithsonian Magazine and stuff like that. And so that's, another like part of my story.
Well, I dedicate this sculpture to you, Grandpa.
Thanks.
And I see that Elise is up.
Yeah. So on that note, that's such a sweet note to dedicate the sculpture to Kelli's grandfather. And we have a comment in the chat about the giant mound. The giant mound is gorgeous, Leslie, from Babs Reingold. So this is a Q&A portion. So everybody watching us virtually, please add any questions you have for Leslie or for Kelli into the chat, into the Q&A function, and we'll make sure to answer them here. We've got one here. Hi, Leslie. I'm curious if you can talk a bit more about the comment you made earlier about that you felt you would always come back to representation, and how has your relationship to representation changed from back when you were a plein air painter?
Well, when I was a plein air painter, it was observational painting, you know, I was looking at something. And I like everybody who goes to art school, you first learn how to draw an apple, and then you draw the figure, and then you draw a tree. And I was so focused on technique that I never really felt like I wasn't either encouraged to or had it in me to say something. It was just all about depicting what I was looking at. And so when I came to New York, I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm bored. I'm boring myself. And also when I moved here in the 80s, I wanted to be part of the discourse. And that discourse in the 80s was all about abstraction. And so that's why I became a sculpture major, because, you don't just decide to become an abstract painter. I didn't have the vocabulary for it. So I thought, if I change mediums, maybe I can develop an abstract vocabulary in another medium, which was really obviously very impactful to my painting. So now I feel like when I'm making painting, observational painting, I sort of have more content that I'm interested in conveying. If that answers.
That does. I'm going to interject a little bit with my own question, because I think what's interesting about the way you were talking about the recent paintings, 2017 and even the 2020 ones, the materiality aspect and the sort of playing between sort of what we're looking at, that sort of realization of sort of the material being the thing, the material representing the thing. And it also feels to me like kind of a parallel between this conversation we're having about America in the show, like the thing you think you're seeing and what it is versus what you think it is. So I'm curious about, in this conversation about content and I'm curious about materiality and how it factors into content for you, how you're thinking about things.
Well, for me, materiality has always been completely embedded into the content. Like the early abstract paintings, the form was the color. It just was what it was. It wasn't depicting anything. It had allusions to, you could say, geology. I was always very interested in geology and the kind of feeling that I could make the paint nearer forces in nature, like compression and subduction and the shifting of tectonic plates. But in the end, the painting was kind of self-contained as the message in a way in itself. I guess moving back into representation, I'm looking for ways to use the material to. It's like the painting takes on the shape of the object it's representing. So again, it becomes embedded into the subject matter in much the same way that the paint was itself earlier. I don't know, I'm not being very clear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that it's all embedded. I think that's it kind of was embedded in the question I asked, and the way you answered it, I think is, it's the same. I also just want to make a point to everybody, because I know that we did miss out on having the image of your work that's in the show, in the slideshow, but there's a link. We did link to it in the chat for anybody who wants to go back and take a look at the piece that's in the E Pluribus Out of Many show. Scroll to the top of the chat. We do have a link for you there.
Here's a question from Leslie, Dill, and Ed. What gives you the confidence to move through such depth of insights?
Oh,
It starts with, "We love your journey!" Exclamation point.
well, those are dear friends, and Leslie Dill is a wonderful artist herself and a National Academician. I don't know. You don't. I don't think anybody who's courageous actually thinks that they're courageous, because you don't say to yourself, "I'm going to do this courageous thing." You're just compelled. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's like that move to make the big sculpture. I didn't think I was being courageous. I just didn't know what else to do with myself. I was just like, I just want to do this damn thing. And I just allowed myself to do it. Maybe that's it. Allow yourself to follow your
That's really true.
instinct.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how I always say it. So you have to give yourself
Permission.
Yeah.
No one
Because
else though, right?
You want to be authentic. You don't want to if you keep doing what you think you're supposed to do or what people expect you to do, you're going to end up boring yourself and then boring them too.
So here's a question from Babs Reingold. Hi, Leslie. Can you talk more about how you started to work with the early shaped canvas? Did you do sculptural paintings in art school?
No. Hi, Babs, by the way. No, I didn't. I was a straight ahead painter, on rectangular canvases. No, I mean, obviously, becoming a sculpture major, learning sculpture in school changed everything, but it wasn't as if I graduated and then said, well, I'm now going to make sculptural paintings. It's just that the experience of making sculpture, and of course, living with a sculptor, makes me approach the material of paint in the same way that I would approach making a sculpture, in that you can build a painting just like you build a sculpture. I mean, paint is just another material, and that's it. Paint is just another material to make a work of art. That it happens to hang on the wall and you call a painting is immaterial. Not immaterial, not relevant. And so, it took a while before I got there. I think it was really, I always look back to kind of a pivotal moment when I saw the Elizabeth Murray retrospective at MoMA. And she obviously is somebody that I always knew about, but her goofy imagery really was so far away from what I was involved in that I wasn't connected to her really in my mind. But when I saw that show, it was like a light bulb went off, and that was a eureka moment. I just felt like, that's it. She released me from the tyranny of the rectangle. And from that point on, I started making shaped paintings. And I don't think I've ever looked back. Yeah. I never know.
So I think you may have just answered a portion of this next question, because it sounds like you had a eureka moment seeing those paintings. So this question is from Rose Malenfant. How do you tap into your form of eureka in your creating process?
Well, again, you can't will it to happen. It either happens or not. So you have to just create an environment where you are not restricted by talk radio. For me, there are a lot of people who listen to talk radio. They listen to books on tape. I can't do that. Yeah, I'm not saying it's, everybody has a different way of working. For me, it's too distracting. I have to be, usually I just put on music really loud. I like to listen to music really loud. And then if it happens, great. If it doesn't, just keep trying.
So then that begs the question, what music do you listen to really loud? What would your playlist be?
Oh gosh, I have everything from classical to jazz to I've been listening to Peter Gabriel a lot lately. I just love him. And with the Rolling Stones, you know, I'm an old rocker.
We've talked about needing to make a National Academician Spotify playlist.
That's a good idea.
Just everybody contribute, you know, go through different moods, however people want to categorize. I think it'd be great.
Exactly.
I was talking with my advisor for a show called Basic History at the Benton Art Museum in Connecticut. And, you know, Jeff Agbar is there and has been there for like 20 years. He did a Spotify playlist for the show that is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's super, super good. And I was like, why did I never think about this for like any of my exhibitions? You know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna do one last call for everybody to include any more questions you have for Leslie or for Kelli. We had who's retrospective. I think we just wanted a repeat of I think what Kelli was saying. Or no, sorry, it was the moment retrospective.
Elizabeth Murray.
Elizabeth Murray, yeah. Sorry, that was for somebody which wanting a repeat. Any other questions in the chat? This is your final moment. So Leslie, I'm curious about, you know, you've got your candy mound, the sort of dedication to hobos. I'm curious about like, if that is sort of like where you were still at, is there like a what's next? Is there something else that you're thinking about? Like what is sort of the ideal next step? What are you giving yourself permission to do next, I guess?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of weirdly at that in-between moment again, because making that thing was so trying physically. It was just an enormous effort. And I relied on Don a lot because I just literally couldn't. I mean, he built a structure that, the understructure, and needed a lot of power tool work that I couldn't do myself. So it was a huge effort. And I made another sculpture that's only 6 feet high. But I didn't want to reproduce, I just didn't want to make another version. I wanted to have a different experience. And it ended up kind of looking like a little floating glacier, iceberg. So, so I don't know. I really don't know. I'm doing a couple of other things that have nothing to do with anything that we've been talking about. So I'm giving my permission to do that. I'm working on a limited edition handmade book, and I'm working on another project that involves a lot of science and technology that I'm completely out of my depth in. So I'm relying on a lot of people. So I don't know if I'll be able to pull it off, but speaking about that glacier, the glacier sculpture, I'm fooling around with the idea of creating a little sculpture of a real glacier, an actual glacier, based on actual data of a real glacier. So yeah, that involves all sorts of technicalities that I'm a little out of my depth on, but it's an interesting journey, and I'm meeting so many nice scientists. Scientists are so nice. They're so helpful, and I've just been in contact with a lot of really interesting and very encouraging people who keep sending me articles and sending me to other people, and so so I'm in this kind of weird space where I'm doing a lot of different things. I have no idea where I'm going to end up. I don't know.
I think that's an exciting space to be, having no idea.
Yeah, it's like I'm learning how to like allow that to be okay.
Yeah. It's got to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's also the theme of the sort of the answer to some of the questions of the exhibition is like having no idea where we are as a country, being okay with that.
Yeah, so I was watching Nicole Hannah-Jones speak last night, you know, and she was like, you know, you have to find something, like you find the thing that you love and like you defend it, you know, because we're specifically in that moment,
right?
You know, of like, this could go either way, you know, you know, and we don't necessarily know what are at the end of either way, right? Like what the result of either would be. You know, we kind of think, well, we kind of know that like if we go a particular way, maybe a little bit better. but she's, you know, I hadn't thought about it like that, like just finding something, you know, that you believe in and just, you know, and standing like very firm for it. You know, it's like one way, you know, to like assert oneself,
Right.
you know, in this moment, or to like to find like one's own stability, you know, in such a shifting time.
Well, thank you both for joining tonight. It's been wonderful to hear you guys talk, reconnect, because I know this is only one of many conversations you had.
Especially connected on Zoom, so this was fun.
I know it's super was.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be able to connect in different states and, you know, different places. I know we all are. For those of you joining us, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Of course, we have another one next Tuesday, so please come back to join us for a conversation between Joyce Kozloff and our Chief Curator, Sara Reisman, and we actually will have a special guest, which is one of Joyce's co-collaborators on the We Make America project, Tamara Gayer, I believe. I will double check that name, but it is all in our information. So please RSVP for that. We've dropped that link in the chat. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you again, Kelli. Thank you, Leslie. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Have a great night, everybody.